You're all welcome to this third National Gender Dialogue, and it's being hosted by the Ministry of Gender, Children, and Social Protection as well as its partners. And we are assessing 30 years of the Interstate Succession Law 1985, also known as the PNDC Law 111. I bring you welcome and felicitations, and we acknowledge ministers of state, the Gender Ministry, members of Parliament, representatives of ministries, departments, and agencies, members of the diplomatic corps, our diplomatic and development partners, also our traditional rulers, our chiefs, queen mothers, Nime, Name, and the media.
It was a system that was discriminatory and was creating untold hardship for especially women and children. You know that in Ghana, property is status. Yeah, property is status. And so most of the men are the ones who have the property because of the way society has socialized us to be. And so most women already do not have property. And so when during intestacy, you lose out also on what should have rightfully been yours, then it poses a huge challenge. Then your status is compromised, and it is also linked with economic empowerment. When there is nothing to hold on to, you know, because you can use the property to access credit facilities. You can use it to help your children move forward. Meanwhile, because of centuries of tradition and belief systems, women were found themselves in a huge dilemma. So I think that it changed custom. That is the most important thing that is here. It changed custom. And it didn't write it off. No, it didn't write it off. More so, custom is dynamic anyway.
For you, what are the sociological perspectives in looking at this law and how it worked? And of course, we must bear in mind that there are two areas. You have those of us in the urban areas and those in rural areas.
Thank you very much. We live in society, and society is dynamic. And not forgetting the fact that we are social beings. And society has progressed from the simple society to a more complex society. So in the simple society, we had the traditional ways of doing things, and inheritance is part of society's way of sharing property. Now, development, or as society progressed, we always progress for the better. We want to move on and have the better part of everything. We move on from worst to the best. So in looking at how the interstate succession law has worked over the 30 years, what we can see here is that it hasn't really taken away our cultural or what inheritance is, but has rather made it better for the beneficiaries when you lose out on your spouse.
There's also the issue about, you know, how important this is for spouses. A lot of the time, people really ask, is this necessary? I mean, do you have to kick up a whole dispute just to ensure that people get what they deserve? Bernice, Sam, if you want to start that for us.
Thank you, Jifa, and thank you for the opportunity to share a few perspectives on the impact of the law with all of us. I'd want to look at the impact of this law from a number of points. And the first is to address whether we have enough data that allows us to see how many people have benefited from this law formally through the court system and informally through various means as FIDA, WILDAF, and other organizations are doing. Because obviously, when you want to advocate for another law, you need a basis, and most parliamentarians, development partners understand statistics. So we need to look out for that data to support the new bill that is in place. The second point I want to make is to do with the economic costs for many women and men who lose out on property under this law. We have several women, as has been mentioned by earlier speakers, not being able to use the property or losing the property to family. What is the economic cost of that to the country? Because obviously, as our ADB, African Development Bank representative said, every country wants to grow. We want to develop, and we can't develop with only one sex. We need the contribution of men and women. But if we have a practice or practices or a law which is not being implemented, then what is the economic cost to the country? We need to look at that. Thirdly is the question of cultural relativity and human rights. In as much as this law addresses the cultural or the discriminatory practices in our society, people are still holding on to what makes us Ghanaians, holding on to the culture. The fourth point I want to make relates to how the principles that the formal sector is applying, i.e. the courts, they are applying the law as it is, and I'm sure Benson will mention the way that the court has strictly applied the law in some instances, in other instances where the court has tried to introduce new decisions and requested that, looking at superior courts also either interpreting, following precedent or not. So that is happening. But the informal sector, many women, many men, many children live in rural areas where access to formal court system is difficult. So what principles are these informal sector mechanisms applying?
I'll take the interesting side of PNDC Law 111. I think the very title and the number of the law was interesting. PNDC Law 111. And it made it easy to remember. And anytime you went into the communities for education, it was easy for people who didn't even know the content of the law to know there is a PNDC Law 111. The downside of that interesting part of it was that it led to some communities, especially some Christian communities and churches, thinking that it actually meant share in three. So 1 to family, 1 to children, 1 to spouse. And there are quite a number of cases that I got wind of in which some communities were doing sharing like this, as though the very number of the law meant let's share in 3. Okay, so that is one side that we needed to look at. But I am so sure that the number of the law itself was a novelty for many Ghanaians, and it stuck.
Let me bring in Mr. Benson Yusupi, who is the president of the Ghana Bar. Please give us a certain perspective about how the law is implemented in the courts. We've seen some examples of people talking about how it worked for them. I'm sure there are many others who've not been so lucky. There are probably technicalities that also prevented others from actually benefiting.
Mr. Chairman, Her Excellency the First Lady, since this is the first time I'm going to say something, let me wish you Happy International Women's Day before I start. Now, I'm supposed to be looking at how the courts have handled the succession law. By and large, it's been quite positive. When I looked through the brochure, I said to my friends, all the work has been done. And look at, I'd already been taken at Inri Asante. Owusu versus Asante, the one in which the Supreme Court got to the position that it's only legitimate wife and legitimate children that can inherit under the PNDC Law 111.
Okay, let me just interrupt you there. Why is that fundamental, knowing fully well that we have a society where some people marry multiple women under customary law or may have their misses under ordinance, but would still engage or do a traditional marriage with another woman?
Interestingly, that position has long been legislated out. So, children, no matter how you define them, legitimate or illegitimate, from polygamous or from a mistress, would inherit under the intestate succession law. So, we have moved a little bit away from that. The other issue that I was going to look at, but it's also clearly dealt with in the brochure, is the position that you have to register your marriage before you benefit. It was a wrong position. The courts corrected it upstairs, that all that was needed was evidence of marriage. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jifa. It is a privilege and great honor for me to extend our thanks to you all on behalf of the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection. I also take this opportunity on behalf of the ministry to thank Nana Chair for responding to our call to not only celebrate this special day with us, but to steer affairs to this very moment. Your Excellency, Dr. Nana Kunedu Ajiman Rawlings, we are exceptionally grateful to you for your time and effort to be here today.